Howdy folks, Doc here with Last Best Tool, and today we're going to continue the toolbox tour, moving into the lower section, this roller cab here. I picked up used years ago, and I originally had a handful of other kinds of toolboxes, and the one prior to this was actually a Craftsman, one of the fancy ones that actually used ball bearings. I guess that was fancy back then. And it was okay, but I really did not like, once you loaded the drawers with tools, how hard, how much resistance, kind of grinded along, opening and closing. So I had my eye out for a Snap-on one. So I actually picked this thing up used, which obviously that's a good way to get these. And I wanted one that fit actually in this spot. After I bought this house, I still had to get permission to turn up one of the bedrooms into a shop. You guys know what I mean. And I ended up wanting a toolbox that actually fit where this chest of drawers used to be built in this space here inside the bedroom. So I ended up pulling apart the chest of drawers and sliding this toolbox in. And then I ended up getting an upper section, which we've already toured as part of another deal, and I ended up buying basically exactly the same thing, but with the top box. Sold the bottom box for what I paid for both, so I ended up getting the top box essentially for free. And believe it or not, I think I paid $250 for this thing. This is it's an older one. Still has it's got the newer logo, but it's I'll show you how I know it's one of the older boxes. But anyway, I absolutely love the thing for what it is. They wanted about $500 for it. It was at a pawn shop, and it just sat and sat and sat. That because that was way too much, I thought, for a box this small. But I just watched, and then you kind of ask questions. How low could they go on it, etc., and they drop the price a little bit. But how easily and in what increments they drop the price gives you an idea of maybe what they're into it. So I waited, and believe it or not, it lasted about a year, and then I finally went back and just offered them, I think $250, and they said, yeah, just to get it out of here. They could have put $300 and sold it at any point. Instead, they wait. I had to pull the handles off the side to get it in here. Anyway, so it works great. So I've got a little tool nook inside this area that I'm building out my shop. So the drawer we're going to work with today, I kind of consider my metric spanning drawer. I keep my metric stuff separate from my standard stuff. In fact, one of the ways although this might not look terribly organized, it actually is. I don't work on spacecraft or something, so I don't have to account for every single tool. But I also didn't like, say when I bought a set of set of wrenches, or screwdrivers or something, it came in, a nice, very organized container. Well, those containers take up an enormous amount of room, and some people think that maybe the reason we're going to these such massive, McMansion toolboxes is because everything has got its own space in the toolbox and its own buffer around that space. So each tool basically is like 5 times bigger, even though it's the same size tool. It's taken up 5 times as much room in a toolbox. Well, I don't need that kind of organization. So I do it on my own, or my own pattern that I can easily tell if somebody's borrowed something. It's not where I would put it when they try to put it back, or it's missing, and I can actually tell. In this particular drawer, this is my metric spanners, and I go basically from the large to the small in the wrenches, and they're underneath all of this stuff. I've got nut drivers, hex torques, etc. through here, and then I've got my small kind of stubby stuff, stubby spanners here, and then some older Craftsman ratcheting spanners there that someday I'm going to replace with Snap-on. But anyway, I'll walk you through this. I do have a few other larger wrenches, but I don't keep them in there. And like this is one. I usually just hang them up on the wall because this just takes up way too much room inside this toolbox. This is used for headsets, etc. on older vintage bikes. I do a lot of work on old vintage stuff. So anyway, if it gets too big, I move it out. I don't need a giant drawer just to hold that. I'll just put a couple of nails in the wall and hang it like a trophy. Anyway, so let's start over here. I've got my large spanners, 20, basically the classic set. I think it's like 10 to 22 or 8 to 22 of the spanner wrenches, or the standard Snap-on combination wrenches. I've got a 24, 22, sometimes, believe it or not, you need two of the same. A lot of people would switch to a adjustable wrench, but if it's something that I'm going to run into quite common, I end up picking up the wrench and having that handy. But sprinkled across the top, I've got my hexes. I use these a lot. I did a video where I kind of did an unboxing and got my Snap-on hexes instead of the Craftsman. Now, this is a little on the big side when you're grabbing a hold of it compared to the smaller Craftsman, but I definitely wanted both the 90-degree ball, or the 90-degree hex head. But if you notice here, the Craftsman is a ball head, and the ball heads can be really convenient if you're coming into something that is at an angle, but for precision work, and I work on a lot of high-end mountain bikes, and if you've got like a $5,000 articulating carbon fiber frame with full suspension, you want, and everything's held together with hexes, you want a worthy hex. And that's where, do I have, near 90-degree angles, coming off the side to the face of the wrench, as well as the precision, the machining, because this little wrench, this 5 here, might be the most important wrench on, an $8,000 mountain bike. So, this ball head is more for an angle, and you can see it's scuffed up. So if you come in at an angle, this thing still works, and that's kind of what it's designed for, is a greater number of degrees that you can still get something to function. Well, that's not at all what I want to do. I can go right in exactly 90 degrees, and I want precision and power right there, because otherwise there's a chance I'm going to mess something up. So anyway, that's one of the reasons I went with the Snap-ons, and I'm happy I did. I didn't need all of them. I just needed a few select sizes, because those I use over and over again. So I got 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are the main ones that you use in the cycling industry. I also have extra 10mm wrenches. I use them for quite a few different things, and I'm kind of always exploring different 10s. These are ratcheting combination wrenches. This one here, it's branded Ace Professional, and it's on the other side gear wrench. And I do have some older gear wrenches, and I like those. This is the Snap-on. You can hear the difference. I'll do it over here by my mic. Snap-on's much more precise, nicer, lower profile head. It's also at an angle versus flush. So this one you can turn over, doesn't need a switch, so it's less complex. This one, of course, with an angle, you need a switch to forward and reverse it. But anyway, so these two are both gear wrench. I am a fan of midgets, and I hear a lot of folks who, they're not that excited about a midget because you've, cut your leverage, almost in half. Well, that's fine with me in a lot of cases, and I'll explain why. The midget wrenches, and I've got a set of Snap-on midgets. This midget, this is a 19. This doesn't come in terribly handy. That is a pretty good sized nut or bolt to have something just fist size. In other words, the leverage is just the size of my hand. I'm not gaining it by throwing on an extra length. But when it comes down to things like the 15, this is just really handy for an awful lot of stuff that I do. As I explained when I went into the kind of that socket conversion from a quarter to a 3/8, a lot of the things that I do as a DIYer is to kind of explore fixing things myself. Having big tools, if I'm just learning, allows me to do more damage more quickly. Anyway, and a lot of the stuff that I'm working on might not be that big. Even though the fasteners might be large, they may not need quite the torque that, say a car or a truck needs. So I have the larger ones, but I also use the stubbies quite often, and stubby ratchets or ratcheting wrenches are incredibly helpful. They're just so quick. They fit into small spaces. You can have a whole set, in the palm of your hand. And kind of in contradiction to all of that, I do like also using some longer ones because I can be very soft with it. So I can actually apply just a tiny bit of force without much effort. That's kind of the point of the of using levers, but it actually makes it really nice once I get the feel for how the, whatever it is I'm working on is put together, to just do things with much less effort. Whereas a lot of folks want a longer handle to apply, way more effort. So if I'm gentle with a long lever, that's the same as, kind of standard effort with a stubby. So I think that they both have merit. I've got a couple of small sets of spanners. I mean, these are really cute. Is that a 3mm or 3 point? Oh, it's a 3.5 and a 5.5. Just a little piece of Snap On jewelry. I've never needed anything that small because I usually go to some sort of an electronics bit set. There's another 4mm up through, I think, 8, 9. Kind of like ignition wrenches, Snap-on. Over here, I've got a few of the ratcheting. Oh, let me mention this before I forget. Super handy. This is an 8 and 10. I use this for a lot of bicycle work, and one of the reasons is sometimes to get my hand away while I'm doing something else. I might be prying with like brake cable systems, some gearing systems. You're actually using kind of opposing force with two different wrenches, and one needs to fit on the back, but sometimes you want to get your hand away so you have a place to work. So it isn't necessarily using the leverage, it's being able to hold the fastener on one end and still have room to work versus having both your hands like right up against it and sometimes against the frame. So it just buys you space, which is good. And then 8 and 10 are probably the two most common, 12 being the next. And Snap-on actually makes a kind of a nut driver in this form factor. And I'm thinking about getting some of those. The nut drivers basically that I have here, they're Craftsman. I don't know who told them using gold on a gray handle made it easy to read. But I'd like to get a better set of nut drivers, and if I could, make a combination tool here, that would be kind of nice, be what it'd look like. So I may get a set, or not a set, a handful of them, just to try them out. I don't need the whole set since most things are only operating on a couple of different sizes, so I'd probably get 8, 10, and 12. Kind of funny thing about metrics, I don't know if you use metrics much. I think my whole world is pretty much metrics except for some archaic fasteners and aftermarket stuff, which I haven't figured out. But metrics is so much easier to use, and I don't understand why there's hesitancy, except the words are kind of ugly, millimeter instead of inch. That's cool. You know, it's hard to write poetry with metrics, you know, kilometers to go before I sleep. But it's just so easy to move between the wrenches. If you think about the standard, you've got like, well, 1/1 is, you know, the denominator's 1 for a 1-inch wrench, and then you got like a 1/2-inch wrench and a 1/4, you know, and then 3/8 and 9/16 and 7/32 and 11/64. And there's, unless you memorize them or use them constantly, it's very difficult to know where the wrench falls in the line. You know, is a 1/2 bigger or smaller than a 7/16? You know, well, okay, 7 is less than 1/2 of 16, so that must be 1 smaller. But you can't just memorize the sizes, because the quality and the price of your wrench set may dictate which sizes you have. So if you are moving through your wrenches, you might think, okay, what's an 11/64? Because I bought the expensive set, so I've got you know, all the sizes. And where does that one fit? And a lot of people, they grab a bunch of them, you know, and think, okay, you know, I'll just try one till I get it to fit. You know, here, we'll grab this one, and then we'll just try them on. You know, or better yet, they just give up and grab a wrench like this and say, okay, this will answer all of them. But in reality, with metrics, I mean, it's like counting. A kindergartner can do it. You know, and most third graders have already realized that they don't like fractions, yet we continue to use fractional measurements, even though most people couldn't actually explain the fractional system or even give you a size. You know, if I say, show me 11/64, is that big or small? Well, they're probably going to have to do some math, and they're thinking it's roughly 1/6 of an inch, which we don't even have a unit for. So they're going to take an inch and they're going to divide it in half, and you know, and then into thirds, and say, okay, it must be about, you know, that big or so. That's ridiculous. We are so far beyond that. So metrics all the way. I'll be doing another toolbox or drawer tour of my standards that I almost never use. Gunsmithing, I use some Allen wrenches. That's it. There's just so little that I actually use in standard anymore. But anyway, so out here I've got some of the ratcheting wrenches. I use these more on appliances, occasionally something that requires, you know, some real basic turning, or honestly holding a bolt, because I can get kind of a ratcheting mechanism till it's snugged. You know, if I'm using like nylon fastener or nylon insert fasteners or something, and then this will hold it for the final, but I'm using another tool, you know, at the very end. So that's kind of where these fit in. I also use them sometimes with an extension to adjust. Got some antique tables, and I like to, you know, insert and remove leaves depending on our needs. And some of those old tables, I can just stick a 3/8 inch ratchet mechanism on it, and then just crank away with one of these guys, because it doesn't quite fit on a socket very well. I got some older school Snap On kind of medium-sized wrenches down here. Partial set. I'm missing a couple, but this is one of my favorite types of wrenches. Again, it's kind of more in the midget size. But I've got a whole set of these, and you know, this like 11 and 12, you know, the 18, 20, really handy. So this and a set of spanners, you know, can do about anything. And then standard, or the regular crafts, or Snap-on midgets. In here, the Snap-on, this is a real, good deal from Snap-on. Usually people don't say that in the same sentence, but these hex wrench sets that Snap-on sells are actually quite good. They made older ones that were metal, and those kind of like this size here are still around. They still function. You can get them warrantied out. You can pull them apart and swap out pieces, or you can just swap the whole thing out. It's heavy plastic. It's rebranded. I've seen it under a few different names. But honestly, for the price, these are great. I would highly recommend them. And in fact, I'll mention this when I do my standard drawer. This has gotten me out of a ton of jams. It seems to have sizes that are missing in a lot of other sets. And it's exactly the size that I need. So this little guy it's worth it to have around. Anyway, so then I've got a Craftsman Torx. I'm not super thrilled with the new Craftsman quality, but if I'm not sure what I'm getting into, this is a good thing to be able to grab. This is the DeWalt set. This one locks. So as I pull one of them out, I can actually, one of the wrenches out, I can lock it in a position, and that's kind of helpful, whereas these flop around. You know, sometimes that's a little tougher to hang on to depending on the angle and the force you're trying to use. And I haven't had any real problem with the DeWalt ones. I assume they're overseas. But it sometimes on the US, or I mean on the fractionals, is missing critical sizes. Anyway, so that's this drawer. I should probably spend more time maybe trying to organize it. I kind of just sort of lump things in corners, but a lot of times it works just fine. And I've actually got room, believe it or not, for more tools in here. But at the moment, this is what it looks like, and I'm totally happy with it. Works great. So with that, we're going to close out the first drawer of the bottom cabinet. Dock out.